My friends, I just want to bring you another thought this morning on what's happening in Ukraine and with Russia in particular. The last broadcast I did, I talked about the hook in Russia's jaw, and we saw that mentioned in Ezekiel 38, which you can see there. I will turn you around and put hooks in your jaws and lead you out. To turn you around is kind of like a phrase that means I will turn you towards Israel, because that's what he's talking about. Okay, so I will turn you around, I will turn you towards Israel, I'll put a hook in your jaw and lead you out with all your army, horses and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, and all of them handling swords. The last broadcast I talked to you about oil and gas being the hook that is in Russia's jaw. Russia, I believe, has been forced into this war. Now, I'm not defending Russia. I'm not defending what they're doing. Don't get me wrong. But I believe that the West, and Joe Biden in particular, has forced Russia to fight the same way they forced Japan to fight back in 1933 and in the beginning of the Second World War. They put all kinds of restrictions on them, crippled Japan's economy, so they had to break out somehow. And that doesn't excuse what Japan did during the war either. But let's just say that it's the West and Joe Biden in particular. I blame all of this on Joe Biden. I blame the whole thing on Joe Biden. He should not be in that position. He should be removed as soon as possible. Now, the hook in the jaw was that Russia can no longer sell its oil and gas to Europe, or more and more countries are stopping taking it. And because that is like a single string in Russia's economy, it means that their economy is shot. They got no money and they got to do something. And so we saw that Israel is ramping up its exports to Europe through Egypt. It's shipping oil through Jordan to Egypt. Egypt is shipping it to Greece, and Greece is shipping it to Europe. So that's one way that Europe is getting some much cheaper gas from Israel than what they can buy from Russia anyway. But I want you to consider for a moment another scenario on what will be the Gog-Magog war of Ezekiel 38, when that coalition of countries that I've spoken of so often comes against Israel. Now, according to Derek Walker from the Oxford Bible Church in England, he believes that it will be that they will come down onto the mountains of Israel. You see, the Bible talks about all the time about the war is on the mountains of Israel, okay? And that's the high country. It's what the world calls the West Bank. That's where Abraham walked. That's where all the Jewish patriarchs, that's where they lived, that's where they walked, that's what they did. And some of that land was won back during the 1967 war. And the thought is, and Russia has said just the other day, that Israel doesn't have any right to that land. They got no right to annex it. This is while they're trying to annex Ukraine. They got no right to Ukraine either. And they're killing all of these people. They have not won the war from a military point of view. I mean, the Ukrainians are really fighting well. And so they're just bombing whole cities. It was reported last night that a fighter plane came over a big theatre and bombed it with hundreds, if not, I heard a figure of 1,000 people were sheltering inside. And all of those civilians were killed. For what? For what? So Israel has said to... Well, let me go back a little bit. Israel is building settlements on the captured West Bank, which they consider to be their territory, which the world does not. And they say that the settlements that have been built there are illegal, and according to a particular United Nations resolution, they have to be removed. Now, if Russia wants to come and invade Israel, the most likely thing that they will do is come down to Syria, and then Syria, of course, backs onto Israel and come in through the Golan Heights. If they came in through the Golan Heights, excuse me, they would be able to then come down through the mountains and in the guise of keeping the peace and enforcing the UN resolution. See, when you want to go to war these days, apart from Russia, of course, you need to get a coalition. That's what the Americans and the British did when they invaded Iraq. They accused Saddam Hussein of having weapons of mass destruction, which were never found. But having a coalition of countries all agreeing on the same thing gives it some kind of respectability. And so Russia wanting to invade Israel to get control of the oil and the gas that they've now got, the Bible says, are you coming for booty? So they will come down and say that they're coming down to enforce the United Nations resolution that Israel has to vacate the West Bank and the Golan Heights and get rid of those settlements that are there. And so, my friends, what's happening now, and I want to suggest to you that this could be another hook in Russia's jaw. Israel is saying, and have always said, that all the Jews in Ukraine are welcome to come to Israel, and every one of them will have a house. Okay, so where the house is going to come from. So they're going to build them up on the West Bank. So thousands of Jews are heading towards Israel. They're all going to have a house. That means there are more settlements up on what the United Nations calls the occupied territories, which I don't call it that because I think Israel is entitled to that land. It's their land. It always has been. So if thousands of people come into Israel from Ukraine and from Europe and other countries in Europe too, because a lot of Jewish people won't take the risk that Russia won't invade their country, and so they'll leave now while they can as well. And so hook number 2, thousands of people are coming to Israel. They're all going to need houses. Those houses will be built on the high country and in the West Bank. And Russia will come down and enforce the United Nations resolution that all of these settlements have to be removed. That will give them some kind of respectability, while their real reason is to take booty and plunder the Israeli oil and gas supplies. I want you to consider for a moment that that is hook number 2, to draw Russia down and bring that Gog and Magog war spoken of in Ezekiel 38, bring that war so much closer than what it is now. Just give that to you for your consideration. God bless you, my friends.